I take advantage of Slavic hatred to get men out of my league. Oh. I have come to realize that I'm benefiting from what I sometimes refer to as Slavic hatred, or, more accurately, the negative stereotypes and prejudices attached to Slavic men, to date men who, under other circumstances, would probably never look in my direction. It's a harsh phrase to describe something so deeply tied to cultural prejudice, but I can't deny the advantage I've found in it. I'm a small woman, weighing about 48 kilograms, and at 30 years old, I've never considered myself classically beautiful. I'm more on the sporty side partly because I used to be addicted to methylphenidate, various legal stimulants, for 7 years. It's been almost a year since I've been clean, and staying active in sports is one of the ways I manage my lingering cravings. Most people would not describe me as a physically striking individual. I am from a small European Union country, one that isn't Slavic, where we see Slavs by and large as equal people. However, it's still somewhat exotic to meet someone from, say, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, or Poland, because they are not a large percentage of my country's population. We do still harbor some ancient stereotypes, like the notion that they are all heavy drinkers or have violent tendencies. But I think those prejudices are gradually fading. Despite coming from a place that is relatively tolerant, I am now living in Germany, a country that is also part of the EU, but undeniably has its own complicated social fabric. Within Germany, there is a certain cultural supremacy that can be felt if you are a foreigner. It's subtle at times, but it intensifies when you are from a place considered lesser in terms of economic standing or global power. My home country is often viewed that way. And since the conflict started in Eastern Europe, particularly the war in Ukraine that has been plastered all over international headlines, I've noticed that there is an even stronger stigma against Slavic people here. Friends, acquaintances, and even random strangers on social media have shown everything from mild discomfort to outright hostility whenever the topic of Slavic immigrants or refugees arises. One of the most interesting observations I've made is how the women in Germany, or indeed many local women in Western Europe, seem to quickly dismiss men from Slavic backgrounds. I'm talking about guys from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Kazakhstan, and other places that share historical or linguistic ties to Slavic culture. There appears to be this unspoken rule that dating someone from these countries might be too complicated. People worry about language barriers, potential cultural clashes, political baggage, or simply the unfamiliarity of it all. Some men I've met have gone to great lengths to hide their Slavic roots, even changing their names on social media. For instance, Juri becomes Oliver, Gleb might become James, and so on. I think they do this in an attempt to avoid the snap judgments people make when they see a name that sounds Russian or Ukrainian, especially in the current political climate. I've encountered Ukrainian men who present themselves in a very transparent way, but they sometimes struggle with full integration into German society. They might not speak fluent English or German, or they may have incomplete documentation or incomplete academic credentials. In some cases, they have traumatic backgrounds. These factors combine to make them less appealing to the average German woman who wants a hassle-free relationship. It's not that these women are all cruel or closed-minded, but they do tend to avoid stepping out of their cultural comfort zone. They might say something like, "I don't feel like I can have deep conversations with him because he doesn't speak my language well," or, "I don't want to deal with complicated visa issues." And so these men, who might be kind, calm, good-looking, and healthy, find themselves relegated to a corner of the dating world. Observing all this, I realized I might have an advantage. I'm not saying it's fair or morally commendable, but I'm being honest. I've taken this situation and used it to my personal benefit. Because I'm not from Germany, I have fewer cultural expectations and preconceived notions that a local German woman might have. I also don't share the deep-seated prejudice some Germans have towards Slavs. As a result, I can approach these men without the same baggage, and they in turn often see me as more open-minded or more sympathetic. Over time I discovered I could date, and even sleep with, men who, by most standards, would be considered out of my league. These are tall, muscular guys, often measuring between 1 80 and 190 meters in height. They have great hair, attractive faces, and in many cases, are confident and charismatic. Under typical circumstances, a woman like me, petite, average-looking, and with a complicated past, wouldn't catch their eye, at least not in the conventional sense. But these men, feeling somewhat alienated by local women, appreciate my openness and acceptance. And on my side, well, I'm drawn to them, not just because they're physically appealing, but because they treat me like a human being. Unlike some German men, they don't immediately question my worth or see me as a second-class person from a lesser-known country. They're also less likely to look down on me for my past struggles with addiction. In other words, there's a sense of mutual acceptance that might not exist if we both belonged to more privileged or insular social groups. I realize how odd it might sound to speak so casually of taking advantage of a cultural prejudice, especially one that can be so harmful in other contexts. But at this point in my life, I don't feel overly guilty about it. I've been through enough hardships to let go of that kind of self-recrimination. My self-esteem was shattered for years, a casualty of both my long-term addiction and a toxic relationship with a German man who weighed about 65 kilograms and was mentally unstable. He used to threaten to kill himself if I left him, yet, at the same time, he pushed me away, told me I was disgusting, humiliated me verbally, and treated me like I was worthless. Looking back, I see how damaging that relationship was, and I regret not leaving sooner. But when you're stuck in that cycle of abuse and addiction, it's surprisingly difficult to break free. In addition to that damaging relationship, I experienced an even more traumatic event last year. I was raped by a German man who was nearly 120 kilograms and had drugged my drink. I believe it might have been a combination of GHB and MDMA, but I only remember flashes of the incident. The experience is a blur of disjointed scenes. I recall him taking me to his house, but I don't remember how I got there. It's terrifying to realize how little control or awareness I had of my own situation. It's also embarrassing to speak about it openly, which is why I haven't reported the incident. Logically, I know reporting it would be the proper course of action, but I have no proof of it. Would be my word against his. Later, I found him on LinkedIn, because in Germany, it's common for people's names to appear on their apartment doors. I memorized his name as I left his home in a state of shock. From his profile, I learned he was an IT consultant pursuing his third master's degree. He seemed to come from a good family, whatever that means. There was a time when I believed such backgrounds made someone less likely to commit violent acts. But I've learned that anyone can be capable of anything, regardless of social status or education. It's a bitter revelation, especially when thinking about how easy it is for rapists like him to hide behind a veneer of normalcy or professional respectability. The entire experience left me feeling violated and powerless, but my fear of going through a traumatic legal battle prevents me from seeking justice. Germany, for all its modernity, still has a complex legal system that doesn't always protect sexual assault survivors as thoroughly as it should. Over the years, I've also encountered Slavic men who struggled with mental health issues or other personal problems. But in all honesty, I never felt the same fear with them that I have felt with certain local men who exude an aura of entitlement or aggression. The existence of legal prostitution in Germany is also something that I find perplexing. On one hand, I understand the rationale that legalized and regulated sex work can reduce exploitation and protect sex workers' rights. On the other hand, it's jarring to think that someone could just pay for sexual services if they were so inclined. So why would they need to drug and rape someone? It drives home the point that rape is not about sex or a lack of options. It's about power, control, and dehumanization. It's partly for these reasons that I consider my interactions with Slavic men to be a kind of therapy. I don't mean formal therapy. Obviously, I'm aware that real therapy is something that involves professionals, consistent sessions, and a focus on healing psychological traumas in a structured way. But, in an informal sense, spending time with them, talking to them, and engaging in physical intimacy with them has been healing for me. It may sound questionable to use sexual encounters as a form of healing, but it's allowed me to regain a sense of agency over my own body. I'm quick to note that I don't usually discuss my past traumas with them in detail. Language barriers often make such conversations difficult anyway, And even if there were no language barriers, it's heavy stuff to lay on someone you barely know. A translator app can help me communicate some basic things, but "I was raped last year" is not exactly something I want to feed into Google Translate during a first date. I usually just say something like, "I've been through bad experiences," and leave it at that. Most of them sense that I have a complicated past, and they tend to be gentle or respectful enough not to pry too much. It's a mutual understanding that we have baggage. We're both foreigners in a place that can sometimes feel cold or indifferent, and we find comfort in each other's company. Many of these men have had a difficult time integrating into German society. Take, for example, the Russian guy I met who had been living in Germany for 7 years. He worked as a tech lead in a company, was into CrossFit, and carried himself with humble confidence. He wore sporty clothes, not the stereotypical, nerdy attire you might expect from someone in IT. He mentioned I was the first person he'd ever had a long conversation with in German. That statement blew my mind. I realized how isolated he must feel day to day, working in a foreign environment. At the end of the day, these men often crave a relationship with someone from their own culture, or they fantasize about a local woman they perceive as unattainable. They might still hold on to the dream of meeting someone who speaks the same language, shares the same customs, or looks like the women they grew up admiring. Sometimes they're candid about it, telling me that while they enjoy spending time with me, I'm not who they picture settling down with. And that's okay. I'm not necessarily looking for a lifelong commitment from them either. Sometimes relationships are about companionship in the present moment, helping each other fill emotional voids and healing from past wounds in a consensual, respectful manner. We use each other, I suppose. There's a transactional element to any relationship, whether we admit it or not. In this case, they get companionship, intimacy, and a chance to practice their language skills, or feel less alone. I get a sense of validation, and a space where I'm not belittled or dismissed. I've learned to make peace with that arrangement. I also have alopecia, and feel that with every passing year I'm getting older and less conventionally attractive. As a woman in my 30s, I'm aware that society has all sorts of judgments about beauty, fertility, and desirability. My hair situation has been a significant source of self-consciousness, yet none of the Slavic men I've been with have made me feel ugly or undesirable because of it. They tend to focus on the bigger picture: my personality, my sense of humor, my ability to connect with them on some level. It's liberating not to be reduced to a set of flaws. I'm not naive though. I know that I'm not their ideal partner in many cases, but we form real human connections, however temporary, and that has value to me. In a world that so often feels cold and discriminatory, finding these moments of genuine kindness and mutual support is a lifeline. Let me delve deeper into why I say it's like therapy for me. Therapy, in a clinical sense, would involve talking through my traumas, the toxic relationship, the rape, the self-esteem destruction, and slowly processing them in a safe environment. It would involve a trained therapist who could guide me through the emotional turmoil, help me develop coping mechanisms, and maybe even lead me towards some closure. But that's a lengthy process, and until I'm fully ready or financially stable enough to pursue it rigorously, I found an alternative route. Physical intimacy, when consensual, can be incredibly affirming after you've experienced assault or abuse. It's a way to reclaim agency over your body. When I'm with a man who respects my boundaries and treats me gently, I'm reminded that it is possible to have positive sexual experiences. It helps overwrite the negative memories of being drugged and taken advantage of. It's not a permanent fix, but it's a step toward remembering that my body is mine, and sex can be something I control and enjoy, rather than fear. Then there's the cultural aspect. In Germany, I've often felt overshadowed by the locals, who have set ideas about how you should behave, how you should speak, how you should dress, or even what your plans for the future should be. When I'm with Slavic men who are also foreigners, there's a sense of camaraderie. We're both outsiders in a society that might consider us less than, or at least view us as novelties. We share stories about how we came here, the oddities we've noticed, the casual and not so casual prejudices we've encountered. Sometimes we talk about the conflict in Eastern Europe, and I listen to their perspectives, which might differ greatly from the Western media's portrayal of things. There's a dialogue that is unfiltered by local cultural expectations because we're meeting on this patch of common ground, being strangers in a strange land. Of course, Not all my encounters have been perfect. I've met some men who were clearly dealing with significant emotional baggage, anger management issues, depression, or other mental health struggles. One man from Ukraine had lost family members in the war, and the trauma he carried was evident. He was prone to sudden mood swings, and while he never hurt me, there was a sense of tension that made it difficult to feel fully safe. Nonetheless, compare it to the brazen assault I experienced with that German man, or the emotional abuse from my ex. Even these tense encounters felt more navigable. Maybe it's because they were more transparent with their pain. They didn't mask it with the same veneer of politeness or political correctness that I've seen in some locals who end up doing horrific things behind closed doors. What is absolutely clear to me is that the world is, in many ways, rotten. There are pockets of goodness and kindness, but they can be hard to find. The fact that I'm using cultural prejudice to my advantage, that I can openly say I'm taking advantage of Slavic hatred, speaks volumes about the twisted ways in which humans relate to each other. If society didn't stigmatize these men, would I have the same opportunities to date them? Probably not. They'd be flooded with attention from local women, and I'd be just another average woman with a messy past. But because prejudice puts them at a disadvantage, it ironically opens a door for me to connect with them. I know that some people might criticize me for this, or say it's unethical, but we live in a world where advantage is gained and lost based on things like race, nationality, beauty standards, and class. I'm simply surviving within that reality. At the same time, I'm not trying to exploit anyone. I genuinely enjoy the company of these men. I'm not out to scam them or break their hearts. I'm meeting them halfway, being present, being kind, and sharing a moment in time where we can both feel a little less lonely. In terms of expectations, I don't have very many. I don't expect these interactions to blossom into lifelong partnerships. I don't harbor illusions that we'll marry or start a family. A part of me is too jaded for that. My alopecia and aging body remind me daily that youth is fleeting and beauty is subjective. My past addiction and the residue of trauma from the rape and the abusive relationship weigh heavily on me. At 30, I feel older than my years. Yet, strangely, I also feel a certain sense of freedom in not pinning all my hopes on a fairy tale ending. I can embrace the present more fully. I can enjoy a casual conversation, a late night dinner, a warm hug, or even a passionate encounter without the anxiety of, where is this going? Overshadowing everything. Sometimes, I do wonder if one day I'll meet a Slavic man, or any man really, who will surprise me and want to build a real future together. What would that look like? Would we navigate the complexities of visas, family expectations, or language barriers? Could we settle somewhere that feels equally new to both of us, so neither of us has the upper hand or the advantage of local status? These are idle fantasies that crop up in my mind when I see couples strolling in the park, or read stories about cross-cultural marriages that work out. For now, though, I'm content to keep things as they are. I'm enjoying a sense of rebirth in my sexuality and personal freedom. When I left my country, I was escaping not just geographical limits, but also the psychological confines of my old life. My addiction, my low self-esteem, my manipulative ex-boyfriend. In Germany, despite the challenges, I found a space to reinvent myself. Meeting Slavic men has been part of that reinvention. They allow me to see myself in a different light. Neither a victim nor a worthless addict, but a woman worthy of attention, warmth, and respect. It's strange how an environment can shape your experiences and your identity. Back in my home country, I was the ex-junkie, the girl who made some terrible life decisions, the one who never quite fit in. Here, among people who know little of my past, I can be whoever I want to be, and these men, many of whom also have complicated stories of migration or displacement, understand that desire to start fresh. We share that sense of wanting to build a new narrative for ourselves, even if we are building it in fragments. One date at a time, one conversation at a time. I am not sure what the future holds. Perhaps eventually I'll put down roots, find steady work, and seek formal therapy to deal with the lasting trauma of rape and abuse. Maybe I'll grow tired of these fleeting connections. Or perhaps I'll continue to meet more men who share with me their stories of leaving their homeland, dealing with prejudice, or coping with the weight of stereotypes. Either way, I've learned not to expect too much from life. I've learned that healing, in whatever form it takes, often comes in increments. To be clear, I'm not advocating for the exploitation of stereotypes or the perpetuation of prejudice, but I am highlighting the odd ways in which systemic biases and personal traumas can intersect to create unexpected opportunities for connection. If there is a moral lesson in all this, it's that people should question their prejudices. If Slavic men weren't written off by many local women, I wouldn't have this strange advantage. They wouldn't be so hungry for acceptance and intimacy, and I wouldn't be their gateway to feeling normal in a society that often alienates them. When I think about the phrase, Slavic hatred, I realize it's an oversimplification of a broader cultural prejudice that varies in intensity across Western Europe. But it's provocative, and it forces us to confront the ugly underbelly of social biases. I'm simply acknowledging that it exists, and that for better or worse, I found a personal silver lining in it. The men I meet are not monsters, quite the opposite. They're often kind, thoughtful, and sincere. Many of them have intellectual or athletic pursuits that align well with my own interests. Through them, I've discovered new music, new perspectives on global politics, new ideas about resilience in the face of adversity. I'll admit, I do sometimes feel a twinge of guilt for not being able to fully open up about my rape experience with them. Part of me wonders if it would deepen our bond if I shared the darkest corners of my past. But another part of me is convinced it might scare them away, or burden them with something they're not equipped to handle. Maybe that's my own fear talking. Maybe I should trust that some of them could be supportive. But for now, I've chosen to keep those traumatic details mostly private. My body is still healing. My mind is still healing. And I don't want to risk triggering or re-traumatizing myself by hashing out the entire story through a phone translation app. All in all, I'm navigating a labyrinth of cultural tension, personal trauma, and evolving self-discovery. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I only know that, in this moment, I've found a small sanctuary in the arms of men who are also seen as outsiders here. And in that shared outsider status, there's a tenderness that helps me breathe a little easier. We might speak broken versions of each other's languages. We might rely on gestures and Google Translate. But the human connection is there. The warmth, the empathy, and the willingness to see each other as complex individuals rather than caricatures. Those things matter. I understand that some people might question the ethical dimension of my so-called advantage. Yet, I believe each of us finds coping mechanisms for our pain. Mine happens to be forging connections where mainstream society sees none. It's not purely opportunistic. Either, I genuinely value these men, and I hope they feel valued by me in return. If the day comes when the prejudice against them lessens to the point where my advantage no longer exists, I'll actually be glad, because that will mean we've moved a step closer to a world where people aren't judged by their passports or their names. Until then, though, I will continue to live in this strange gray area, balancing my own emotional needs with the social realities that make these connections possible in the first place. To sum up, yes, I take advantage of the negative stereotypes that many local women hold against Slavic men. Yes, I've slept with men who, by conventional standards, would be considered out of my league. And yes, I've found a form of therapeutic solace in these encounters. My past, the addiction, the abuse, the rape, has shaped me into someone who desperately craves a sense of validation and safety. Right now, I'm finding it with men who are, ironically, also victims of societal biases. We come together in a mutual longing for acceptance, for uncomplicated companionship, and for a little bit of hope in a world that often feels dark. I don't know if that's something to be proud of, but it's my reality. And in a sense, it's a testament to the strange ways that human connection can flourish, even in the shadow of prejudice and pain.